Kentucky basketball is already a few practices in this summer, and we've got plenty of takeaways to dive into.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be taking a look at some major takeaways from Kentucky basketball's first few practices. Mark Pope spoke with the media and had some wonderful things to say about how this team is coming along, how the staff is getting together. It's really, really good stuff to hear. We're going to dive into all of that on today's episode, as well as a very bold prediction from one of you guys here on YouTube. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky basketball, a ton of takeaways from their first 6 practices, according to Mark Pope. We've got a lot to dive into here. We'll work our way through the press conference, different comments that he had, but I really want to focus on here in just a little bit just how important it is to Mark Pope that the players not only get along and build chemistry, but they lead this team. I want to dive into that later, but first, some different details that Mark Pope shared at the beginning of the press conference. He talked about how different veteran players that Kentucky has, all of them, they were handpicked, they fit the pieces fit is what he continued to say. They fit their different roles very, very well. And this entire group is malleable to an extent where they are veteran players. They are very experienced and they're able to kind of pick up on concepts and terminology and just things quickly. But these guys, this group of guys are very much so willing and eager to learn and then to act upon what is currently being taught to them. 6 practices in, some tweaks, some terminology, some things that the coaching staff is trying to get them to learn how to do, or just trying to teach them the way that the staff wants them to do it. Apparently, the entire team has been extremely receptive, and you've gotten to see some strengths, I think, so far, according to Mark Pope, throughout these first few practices. For instance, he talked about how Amari Williams, one of the first things that they did whenever that he was hired is that he wanted to go after Amari Williams, and the reason that they wanted to go after him is because he's such a gifted passer as a center, which will probably play into some rotational things and some schematic things that we'll talk about later on this summer. But Amari's a really, really good passer, right, as a big man. And he immediately has begun to show out here at the beginning of practices, summer practices, and it's kind of made other teammates excited. It's made them want to cut harder. It's made them want to play more aggressively, knowing that they have somebody like that at the 5 that can get them the basketball, and is apparently, according to Mark Pope, dropping dimes in practice. So that's very, very good to hear that Amari, we talk about him, Lamont Butler, Otega Oweh, we talk about those guys as really, really good defenders, and that's their calling card at the end of the day. Amari's a 3-time DPOY at his previous school in Drexel. But you really start to think about, okay, what is the personnel that Pope has succeeded with these past few years at BYU? And most notably, this past season, Ali Khalifa came off the bench and was an excellent passer in their system. You would like to think that Mark Pope would have gone out and gotten somebody that kind of fits that mold, and it seems like they've gotten somebody that is not just really, really good defensively, but also has a little bit of versatility to him and can do those things that open up this Mark Pope system. This is something that we've continued to harp on, and this is something that Pope himself has harped on. He continues to say, we have been blessed to have been able to have essentially gone out and gotten the players that we wanted at each position, 1A or 1B, pretty much in the transfer portal. Everybody has a role. Everybody fits extremely well together. Guys like Amari, I think, are going to shine in Mark Pope's system. And then he continued. He talked about how outside of maybe some things that they're trying to learn, there's not a ton of surprises. He talked about the willingness to learn that this team currently has. And he talked about 3 different players specifically, about just how receptive they've been as older veteran guys. Lamont Butler was the first guy he mentioned, saying that he's taking pieces of advice and implementing them immediately. Andrew Carr is the same way, apparently, with different aspects of the game. Otega Oweh as well. Different guys on this team that are older that are going to likely be either in starting roles or be major contributors that are listening to what this staff has to say and actually acting upon it. And we'll get to this later on, but there's some accountability that I think is already being shown, according to Mark Pope, that maybe we haven't had on both sides of the ball in the past, and I think that's very exciting to see. We'll get to that later on in the show. But he talked about, the pacing of these past couple of months and the pacing of practice, about how there is an urgency to go fast. There's an urgency to learn quick because this is a completely new team. These guys haven't played with each other before. Certainly some of them have played against each other, with a handful of these guys coming from the Big 12, but they've not played with each other quite yet. And 6 practices in, they're still trying to cram a ton of install in to these first few weeks. And Mark Pope pointed out, you only get 1 hour a day, 4 days a week. It's kind of hard to start to instill some more detailed things into this team until everything comes together in the fall, whenever you're able to get kids on campus and they're there more consistently. But he said this. He said, normally we'd be doing skill development, but we're trying to give guys a bigger sense of how Kentucky is going to play. They've been very receptive and are learning fast. And according to Pope, he has never approached an offseason like this. They went relatively fast, adding pieces to the staff, not reevaluating personnel, but reevaluating the position. Apparently, it's taking longer for them to fill these last couple of spots on their coaching staff. I wonder if they need some analytics guys. I know a ton of different people across this beat that would be perfect for that. If you didn't see, by the way, Jordan Sperber, Hoops Vision 68, who we had on the show to talk about Mark Pope and his offense, Sperber actually coached against him during his time at New Mexico State. He just got hired as the senior director of basketball strategy at Mississippi State. So an analytics guy we had on the show just got hired to an SEC program, which is really, really awesome to see. He talked a little bit about significant filters, both at Kentucky and at his previous stop in BYU. Said it was an incredible program, but there were some significant filters in terms of the type of players that could fit there. And he said it's actually the same with Kentucky. Not all players are, quote, built to play here, end quote. And he talked about how competitive and how serious it needs to be taken. And whenever they went out to get those guys, he made it very, very clear, the mission and the goal and the expectation, the standard, as we've continued to say here on the show. He also talked a little bit about during his time down in Argentina, whenever he was going to see Jasper Johnson, somebody brought up how his stick shift operation went because he was driving a car that he was not completely comfortable with. And he made a couple jokes about it. He said, it's not as funny as you think it is, because everybody in the room was laughing. He said, I don't know if there are any traffic laws in Buenos Aires, but I'm pretty sure I broke them all. He was starting to talk about him and that stick shift and then different things about a stick shift, and he interrupted himself. He's like, I'm going to stop before I get in trouble. Very, very entertaining press conference. Just a very likable guy. I really have enjoyed just the different interviews that we've gotten to see and hear from Mark Pope so far. He talked briefly about scheduling, about how complicated it is. They're still working on contracts to finalize some games. And he's liking the way the games are spaced out here during the non-conference, which I don't know if I completely agree, just because of how tough some of these what look like back-to-back-to-back games that we've taken a look at here in the non-con, like how difficult those back-to-back stretches could be. But if he likes it, I'm excited to see what he and his team do. I want to talk very specifically. There was a lot of detail given about believing in a well-oiled machine that is a player-led team. I want to talk about the importance and what Mark Pope believes to be the importance of a player-led team and how this team may be perfect for this upcoming season as far as that goes. Before we dive into that, though, I do want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Game Time has been the place for me, friends, family to go whenever we're looking to get tickets for Major League Baseball games. I am a huge Atlanta Braves fan, and I love to take a trip to Truist Park every now and then to go watch the Braves perform, and the only place that I go to get my tickets are over at Game Time. They are an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. The prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from the seat that you're going to be sitting in, and then they have their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes all of the guesswork out of buying tickets. You can take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, I really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you went and did so. If you have any questions for the show that you want to drop in the comments below, you can absolutely do that. We're going through a series right now of talking about bold predictions for Kentucky basketball this upcoming season. We've got one later on in the show today about Kentucky's power forward position, and I think it's a very, very good, interesting prediction. We'll dive into that later, but first, let's continue to talk here about what Mark Pope discussed with Kentucky basketball's practices during his press conference here just yesterday. So we talked about all of the different things about getting up to speed, about how quickly everybody's been able to learn, about the strengths of guys like Amari Williams, Otega Oweh, Andrew Carr, Lamont Butler. Everybody's been able to kind of fit in and gel and learn. Everybody's being very, it's like a sponge, essentially, based on what I heard. Everybody's just kind of absorbing information quickly as they go, and everything's going pretty smoothly. And I don't take Mark Pope to be a liar. I don't take him to kind of, flub around things and kind of say things that are kind of true. I truly believe if he tells us, hey, things are going pretty well right now, and there are not a ton of surprises, I take him for his word, and that's really good to hear for this group of seniors that they're already coming together like this. And it seems like, according to Mark Pope, they're not just coming together on the court, but they're coming together off the court. And there is a significant importance to that, because if you're able to bond as people, you're going to have a stronger bond whenever you actually go out and compete with each other. And he talked about how Kentucky basketball and his staff, they believe in a player-led team. And he said this, I'll read the quote directly. When guys are on the court making decisions with each other and holding each other accountable and not looking over at the bench and seeing me and seeing if they're pleasing me or if they're doing what I said, but they're doing what the game is teaching them to do, the game is the best teacher. And then you've got it. So what he's saying there is that whenever his players are out there making the decisions with each other, they are going off of what Mark Pope has taught them. They're accepting and looking at what the game is giving them in that moment, whether it be practice, whether it be a game against Duke, whether it be a game against South Carolina this upcoming season. And they're holding each other accountable for the things that they know that they should and shouldn't be doing. They're not looking over to see if they're making Pope happy, but they're doing partially what they've been told to do, and then they're doing what the game in the moment is teaching them to do. And at this point in their careers, that does kind of sound different, I think, from what we've seen with Kentucky basketball in the past, right? At points. But with this team specifically, with all of the seniors that are on it, with the veteran presence across the board at every single position, Kentucky, I think, frankly, should be able to instill in these guys the different concepts, the offense, the schemes, what they should be doing on defense. They should be able to, I would say, relatively easily, especially based on what Pope's saying about how well these guys are, or how coachable these guys are. I think Kentucky should relatively easily be able to go out there with whatever rotation they want to throw out there, whatever 5 guys they want to put on the floor, and see those results, see these players kind of lead this team, kind of go through the process. Mark Pope is there to coach. He's not there to play. So I think this makes a ton of sense for all of these senior guys with how much experience and knowledge they already have to be able to go out there and kind of be independent in a sense. Despite obviously Mark Pope and his staff coaching them throughout the game, they have a little bit of independency here. That's even a word. And I really like this. I really like this note. And I like it even more knowing the fact that this team is able to kind of already put things together mentally. And I understand there's going to be a lot of attention drawn to what Kentucky does on the offensive side of the ball, not just during the season, but also during right now, like during practice, how everything's going, the tempo that they want to play with, like whether or not they are able to find shots consistently like they want to. But I think that you look at things like this, and it's going to be really important, in my opinion, for Kentucky to not just be good on offense and be able to operate independently, but also operate defensively independently, right? I think they should be able to hold each other accountable, communicate, play with passion, play with energy, everyone together on defense. It's going to take Kentucky's entire 5 players that they put out on the court giving effort the entire game in order for them to put out a competent defensive product. We know this because of what we saw last year. There was a lot of lackluster effort on defense. Sometimes there was really good effort and teams still ended up making shots. Sometimes you had 3 players listed at 7 foot or taller and they could not guard a gust of wind. This year is a little bit different. I think that you have players that are going to buy in to what Kentucky is a little bit more than maybe some past teams have. And I think you're going to see a lot more effort, consistent team effort is what I mean. And you're going to see a lot better defense. This here is very important, that Kentucky is relying on these experienced players to go out there and not be held by the hand, not walking them up and down the court, showing, okay, this is what you do, this is what you do, this is what you do. Because if you're able to get these guys operating by themselves, you can really, really, I think, start to work in some excellent coaching in between timeouts and during practices, because you don't have to go over the basics. You don't have to go over the simple concepts. You don't have to remind them constantly of the things that they need to do. They know that stuff already. It's all about tweaking in game. It's all about saying, hey, let's try, what are you trying here? Let's try maybe this instead, and not having to explain what this is, just saying, let's try and work this in. It's really important. Guys are holding each other accountable with the stuff that the staff is trying to teach them, using terminology that they're using. According to Mark Pope, he said he doesn't believe in synonyms. He likes to use the exact same words every time he's trying to communicate something. He's trying to instill that into his team as well. Be very direct and specific with what you're trying to communicate. Talked about how the mark of a great player is a very coachable player, and he's got a ton of those guys on this roster. He continued to say over and over and over just how refreshing it is to see all of these guys. He said obviously there's some standouts, but all of these guys be so willing to pick things up and actually go and execute them. Not just listen, but actually do it. Because he talked about how, like, for some guys, it'll take a week. Some guys, it'll take 2. It'll take 3. Some guys, it'll take several months for them to pick up on, or like to actually like give in to, or be willing to try different things that they're being taught. Some guys, it takes years, he said. But this group has been able to immediately, okay, is this something I want to tweak? And I'm just giving examples here. Pope didn't say anything specific. Is this something I need to tweak about my shot? Is this something about I need to tweak about a move that I consistently go to? Is this something I need to tweak about how I communicate with my teammates? Is this something I need to tweak about how I rebound? It could be a variety of things, but at least this team is actually being receptive and wanting to go and implement it. Apparently, according to Mark Pope, a player was dealing with something to do with an extended family member. Apparently, it was a very emotional day a few days ago, according to Mark Pope. So it was something serious. And Pope wasn't able to actually like get in person and communicate with him in person. So we called him late that night and asked if he was going to something that the player, he didn't mention him by name. He asked if the player was going to something that the player had plans for. And the player said, no, me and my teammate have just spent the last few hours writing a song in the lodge, bonding with each other while he was going through a tough time. Stuff like that is really, really awesome to hear. These guys are already being able to just kind of step into the situation and know that you can start to rely on somebody, to kind of open up, to kind of have somebody's back, to do something fun, like write a song or go play games or go just spend time together. And this is what Pope said. Obviously, Pope asked to hear it, and the player said, no, this song's never seeing the light of day. But Pope said, when guys are watching out for each other and they're doing stupid stuff together, that's how you develop relationships. These are some of the best human beings you're ever going to meet on this team. They're special young men. It's super cool. I love that. Things like that are really awesome to hear. And Pope sort of wrapped up the press conference in a sense by talking about how important it is that both his players and himself, stay true to their personalities and who they are and how they approach this whole entire thing. And he had a pretty long quote about it, and I decided to write the whole thing down. He said, one of the things that you learn really early on if you have great mentors is that you have to coach you. I have to be me. I can't be Coach Patino. I can't be Tubby. I can't be Cal. It would be disingenuous, and my guys wouldn't actually believe it if I tried to take on that personality or even approach the game. Like we're us. The truth is, for all the little warbles and mix-ups, I love getting to coach me. I'm a big believer in what we do, and I love our staff. I think right now we're trying to do everything we can to build on this incredible legacy that is Kentucky basketball and do it the way that we know how to do it, that we really believe is going to work. We're trying to do us. Brand new faces across the board. Brand new season coming in for the Kentucky Wildcats. A very tough challenge. I think a variety of tough challenges in this non-conference slate that are going to hit this Kentucky team like a freight train. We'll see if they can handle it, but right now they're trying to do them, getting themselves prepared, and they understand the expectations. Everything seems to be going in the right direction. We'll continue to monitor practice as the summer rolls on. I want to talk for a second about a bold prediction that one of you guys have about Ansley Almanor. How involved will he be with the Kentucky Wildcats this upcoming season? We'll talk about that in just a moment. I want to remind you guys, if you've not joined the Locked On Kentucky Discord, you can absolutely do that today. It's free. It's a fun place for all of us to chat about all things going on with Kentucky basketball, football, baseball. It's a great place to just go, hang out, talk about anything going on with BBN. So if you want to go do that, you can head over to my Twitter, @LanceDawe_. You can see pinned at the top of my profile is a link to join that Discord. Again, @LanceDawe_ over on Twitter. So where you can find that. Again, it's just a fun place for all of us to chat. I'd appreciate it if you joined. All right, wrapping up the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Let's talk here about a bold prediction that one of you guys has about Ansley Almanor. The transfer from FDU will be playing at power forward for Kentucky basketball this upcoming season. I know he played a lot of time at center last year. It's not going to happen for Kentucky because of just how tall they are relative to FDU. But Joe Mother 1098 over on YouTube, when I asked you guys to give me bold predictions, he dropped this one over on the community tab of our YouTube page. He said, Ansley Almanor will play a much bigger role than most expect. And if you don't know about what Ansley did during his time at FDU, we'll just go ahead and pull it up. In his junior season, 16.4 points per game, while shooting 44% from the floor, 39.4% from three, 5 rebounds, 1.7 assists, 0.7 blocks per game. He shot 39% from three as a 6'7" stretch 4/5 at FDU on 7.5 3-point attempts per contest. He was a legitimate outside scorer. And what is this Kentucky team going to go out and try and do? They're going to try and shoot the basketball from beyond the perimeter at every single position. They're going to do it 1 through 5. They're going to try it out. They had a lot of guys Mark Pope did. Mark Pope had a lot of guys on last year's BYU roster that could do just that, that could take and make those outside shots. And somebody like Ansley Almanor, I think just based off of what he did at FDU, you don't even have to see him in a blue and white jersey to know, hey, this kid would do great. Offensively, he would do phenomenal if he was given the opportunity to kind of pace and space and shoot threes like Mark Pope wants him to. The reason, and I think that Joe Mother would agree with this, that the reason that this is a bold prediction is that there are a couple of players in Kentucky's front court. Actually, there are multiple players that Kentucky could turn to in their front court that are just really good options. Starting, obviously, with Andrew Carr, transfer from Wake Forest. He's going to start at power forward unless something drastic happens, and hopefully, knock on wood, Carr doesn't get hurt. Unless something drastic happens, he's going to be Kentucky's primary four. Now, I know we've talked a little bit about the front court rotation here, and we've acknowledged that last season at Wake Forest, Carr did spend just a little time playing center for the Demon Deacons. Could that be something that factors in here with Kentucky? Sure. Maybe Brandon Garrison is not as big of an impact player as we think he'll be. And maybe, instead of him being the backup five, Andrew Carr essentially slides down, opens the door up for somebody like Ansley Almanor to play the four, and therefore he's able to get his shots and produce in this system, which I believe, if just given the minutes, Almanor could do. But that's the problem, is he has to actually get those minutes. Carr is more than likely going to be taking up most of the time at the four. Almanor is not going to play the five because of the fact that you have Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison. I'm a very, very high believer in Brandon Garrison and his abilities, and I think he's going to be that backup center. I think he's going to be that number two guy. And I think he's good enough to, certainly. So that leaves Almanor playing backup time at the four. Does that give you enough to say he's going to have a much bigger role than people expect? I don't know. And you also have to combine that with the fact that Jaxson Robinson exists. If Kentucky wants to go four-guard lineup, he's probably going to be playing power forward. If you want to go, let's just throw something random out here. Kirk Carissa, Colin Chandler, Kobe Brea, Jaxson Robinson. Kirk Carissa, Lamont Butler. You could go Otega Oweh, Jaxson Robinson. You're going to play Robinson at the four because of his NBA potential, right? You're going to play him at the four because of he's got a high ceiling as a scorer. Where does that leave Almanor when you're talking about him having a bigger role than we expect? Because that's kind of where I sit with it, right? Almanor is going to be fighting for minutes, not just with Carr, but also with whoever Kentucky wants to rotate in a guard-heavy lineup. Maybe early on in the season, Almanor is able to prove that he is statistically more valuable for Kentucky at that four spot than maybe somebody else would be in a four-guard lineup. Maybe he's able to prove that, and he's able to kind of consistently be that second option at power forward. Maybe he's able to split time. I don't know. All I know is that he is going to essentially fight an uphill battle to get to what this commentator is saying, to have a bigger role than we expect. And the commentator didn't define what a bigger role is. He also didn't define what he believes the expectations are with this fan base currently with Ansley. I'll ask you guys in the comments what you think. What are your expectations for him this upcoming season? I think right now, if I'm just placing him, I don't want to give him I don't want to give minutes, I don't want to give stats, but if we're just placing him somewhere in this rotation, he is your backup power forward, and we'll give a number here that Andrew Carr takes 65 to 70% of the minutes at that position. 70% of the minutes at that position. You give Almanor 30 to 35%, I think. And then you have Jaxson Robinson. And then you have somebody like Otega Oweh, who could also play the 4. He did it at Oklahoma at times. So while Almanor, I think if you give him the minutes, he could be a very efficient option for Kentucky on offense. I don't know if he's going to get a bigger role, which is why this is such a fun, bold prediction. I love this prediction because if he plays a bigger role, I think Kentucky as a team is just better. I think you just say, okay, well, here's another option coming off the bench that could be really good for the Wildcats. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Will Almanor have a bigger role than we expect for Kentucky this upcoming season? That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hey, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at @LanceDawe_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.